Pack your things. You have 1 hour. The words fell like shattered glass across the marble floor. Naomi Hale had spent 6 months bringing light back into the darkest mansion in the city, and now, with one photograph, she destroyed everything. But to understand why a billionaire would exile the only person who'd made him feel alive in 4 years, we need to go back to the beginning. Welcome to Stories by Jason. If you're settled in and ready for a good story, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I've got another exciting story coming your way tomorrow, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Thank you so much for the love and support. You're truly appreciated, and I'm so grateful to have you here with me. The words hung in the air of the glass mansion like frost on a winter window, sharp, cold, and impossible to ignore. Naomi Hale stood frozen in the center of the marble foyer, her hands still damp from washing the morning dishes, watching as Julian Ashcroft held up his phone with a headline that made her stomach drop into an abyss. Reclusive billionaire's secret moment. Ashcroft plays piano again after wife's death. Below it, a photograph, his photograph, the one she'd taken. But to understand how 6 months of careful trust could crumble in 60 seconds, we need to go back. Back to the day Naomi first walked through the towering glass doors of the house that grief built. 6 months earlier. The ad had been simple, almost suspiciously so. Housekeeper needed. Live-in position. Excellent pay. Discretion required. Naomi had responded within minutes, desperation overriding caution. Her mother's medical bills were drowning her, the experimental treatment her only hope cost more than Naomi earned in a year, and time was a luxury they no longer possessed. The interview had been conducted by Julian's estate manager, Marcus, a thin man with kind eyes and a carefully neutral expression. He'd explained the rules with the precision of someone who'd memorized them. Mr. Ashcroft values silence. No music ever, no radio, no humming, no singing. The West Wing is completely off-limits, that door stays locked. You'll clean, cook, manage the household, but you do not initiate conversation. If he speaks to you, you may respond. Otherwise, you work quietly and stay invisible. Naomi should have walked away. The rules screamed of something broken, something wrong. But when Marcus named the salary, triple what any normal housekeeping position would pay, she heard her mother's labored breathing in her memory and swallowed every question. When do I start? Tomorrow. The Ashcroft mansion wasn't a home. It was a monument to transparency and isolation, an architectural masterpiece that had been featured in dozens of design magazines before tragedy struck. Every wall was glass, floor-to-ceiling windows that should have flooded the space with light and openness. Instead, it felt like living inside a diamond, beautiful, cold, and utterly impenetrable. Julian Ashcroft himself was equally glacial. Naomi first saw him on her second day, standing motionless in the living room at dawn, staring out at the city lights below. He was 38 but looked older. Grief had carved lines around his eyes and mouth that hadn't been there in the magazine photos from 5 years ago. Tall, lean, with dark hair silvered at the temples and eyes the color of winter steel. He wore expensive clothes with the carelessness of someone who'd forgotten to care about appearance. He didn't acknowledge her presence, didn't turn when she entered to dust the shelves, didn't move when she worked around him like he was a statue. After 15 minutes of silence so thick it pressed against her eardrums, Naomi slipped out and realized her hands were shaking. This was her employer. This was the man whose house she'd inhabit, whose meals she'd prepare, whose life she'd orbit like a ghost. This was Julian Ashcroft, the architect who designed buildings across 3 continents, whose glass house had been meant as a love letter to his wife, Elena, a celebration of transparency and light. This was the widower who'd buried that wife 4 years ago and hadn't left the house since. The routine established itself quickly. Naomi woke before dawn, prepared breakfast that Julian rarely touched, cleaned rooms that already gleamed, and tried not to feel like she was maintaining a museum rather than a home. The glass walls showed her everything. The sun rising over the city, rain sliding down in silver sheets, the lights of distant houses twinkling like fallen stars. But they revealed nothing about the man who lived here. The West Wing remained locked. Naomi caught herself staring at that door more than once, wondering what lay beyond it. Marcus had mentioned it was Elena's art studio, sealed since her death, but he'd said it with the tone of someone discussing a grave. Julian barely spoke. When he did, his words were efficient, emotionless. "The temperature is too warm. I'll eat dinner at 8. Don't touch the piano." The piano sat in the corner of the living room like a sleeping beast, a Steinway grand, black and glossy, its keys covered by a cloth that looked like a funeral shroud. Naomi had never been told explicitly not to touch it, but Julian's single warning carried the weight of commandment. She found herself studying him in stolen glances, the way he stood at windows for hours, completely still, the way he ate mechanically, tasting nothing, the way he moved through this glass palace like a ghost in his own life. And slowly, against every professional instinct, Naomi began to recognize something familiar in his isolation. Grief. She knew its shape because she carried it too. Every night, she called her mother's hospice nurse, listened to updates delivered in carefully gentle tones, and felt the same hollow ache that radiated from Julian like cold from ice. They were both haunted, both trapped in glass prisons of different kinds. But Naomi's bars were circumstance and money. Julian's were self-imposed. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday. Naomi was preparing lunch when she heard it, a sound so unexpected in the silent house that she dropped the knife she'd been holding. It clattered against the marble counter, and she stood frozen, listening. Piano music. No, not music. A single note played once, then silence, then another note, then nothing. She found Julian standing at the piano, the cloth pushed aside, one hand hovering over the keys like he'd touched fire. His face was unreadable, but his hand shook. "I'm sorry," Naomi said quietly, though she wasn't sure what she was apologizing for. "I didn't mean to disturb you." Julian's head snapped toward her, and for the first time she saw something other than emptiness in his eyes. Anger, fear, pain. "She played," he said, voice hoarse as if the words had been locked away too long. "Elena, every morning she played and he stopped, jaw clenching. "I can't." Then he walked away, leaving Naomi standing alone with the echo of 2 piano notes fading into silence. That night she heard him packing in his room until 3 a.m. The second crack came during a storm. Lowe's angels didn't get many storms, but when they arrived, they were biblical. Rain hammered the glass walls like thousands of urgent fists, wind screamed around the corners of the house, and the whole structure seemed to shudder under nature's assault. The power went out at 9 p.m. Naomi was in the kitchen when the lights died, plunging the glass house into darkness broken only by lightning flashes that turned the world into a strobe of white and shadow. She found candles, lit them with shaking hands, and tried to remember where Julian had been. "Mr. Ashcroft," she called into the darkness. No answer. She found him in the living room, standing at the window, staring out at the storm with an expression she couldn't read. Lightning illuminated his face, harsh, stark, devastatingly sad. "The storm," he said without turning. Elena loved storms. She said they made the glass house feel alive, like the world was trying to get in. It was the most he'd said since Naomi arrived. She stood beside him, watching rain cascade down the glass, and made a decision that violated every one of Marcus's rules. "My mother is dying," Naomi said quietly. "Stage 4 cancer. The doctors give her 6 months, maybe less. And I'm here in this beautiful house, earning money to buy her time I should be spending with her instead." Julian turned to look at her, really look at her for the first time. "Why tell me?" he asked. "Because you're not the only person living in a glass prison," Naomi replied. "And maybe we're both tired of being invisible." Lightning flashed, thunder shook the walls, and in that moment of illumination something shifted between them, a recognition, a connection, a small crack in the ice. Julian didn't respond. But he didn't walk away either. They stood together in the darkness, 2 people carrying grief like stones, while the storm raged against the glass walls and tried to break through. The morning after the storm, Naomi found a note on the kitchen counter in Julian's precise handwriting. "You may play the piano if you wish." It was permission, an opening, the smallest of gestures that felt monumental in the context of this silent house. Naomi didn't play, she'd never learned, but she understood what the note really meant. "I heard you, I see you, you are no longer invisible." The dynamic shifted after that night. Julian still barely spoke, still moved through the house like a ghost, but the quality of his silence changed. It became less hostile, more shared. They existed in the same spaces without the previous tension, like two satellites orbiting the same sad planet. 3 days later, Naomi broke another rule. She was dusting the living room when she started humming, quietly, unconsciously, a song her mother used to sing. She didn't realize she was doing it until Julian appeared in the doorway. Naomi's heart stopped. She waited for the reprimand, the cold dismissal, the reminder of the rules. Instead, Julian said, "What song is that?" "Claire de Lune," Naomi replied, voice barely above a whisper. "My mother's favorite. She used to play it on an old keyboard when I was young." Julian was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Elena's favorite too." He disappeared into his office, leaving Naomi standing alone, but something had shifted again. The ice was fracturing, piece by small piece. The transformation happened gradually, like spring arriving to a frozen landscape. Julian began eating the meals she prepared instead of picking at them. He started saying thank you when she brought him coffee. Once, she found him standing at the piano again, but this time he actually pressed keys. A melody, broken and uncertain, but music nonetheless. He played for maybe 30 seconds before stopping abruptly and walking away, but Naomi heard him return to the piano later that night. The notes drifted through the glass house like ghosts finding their way home. "How long since you played?" she asked one morning, bringing him breakfast. "4 years, 1 month, and 17 days, Julian replied without hesitation. Then, softer, "The day after Elena's funeral, I covered the piano. It felt obscene to make music when she couldn't hear it anymore." "She wouldn't have wanted silence," Naomi said gently. "How would you know what she wanted?" The words should have been harsh, but they came out curious instead of angry. "Because," Naomi said, "no one who loves music wants the world to go quiet when they're gone. They want it to keep playing. They want to be remembered in melodies, not silence." Julian stared at her for a long moment. "You sound very certain." "My mother told me that. When she got diagnosed, she said, 'When I'm gone, I don't want you to stop singing. Promise me you won't make the world smaller because I'm not in it.'" "Did you promise?" Naomi's throat tightened. "Yes, and I've been breaking that promise every day since." Something passed between them then, an understanding that needed no words. They were both breaking promises, both betraying the people they'd loved by letting grief consume everything. The walls began coming down in unexpected moments. Julian asked about her mother, and Naomi told him. About the woman who'd raised her alone, who'd worked 3 jobs to pay for Naomi's education, who'd never complained even as cancer ate through her body. About the experimental treatment that might give her a few more months, maybe a year if they were lucky. About the impossible cost that kept Naomi awake at night, calculating, hopping, failing the math over and over. In return, Julian spoke about Elena, how they'd met at an architecture conference, how she'd challenged every one of his designs with her artist's eye for beauty over function, how she'd convinced him to build the glass house, insisting that transparency was the highest form of trust, how she died in a car accident on a Tuesday morning, sudden and senseless and wrong. "The glass was supposed to mean we had nothing to hide," Julian said one evening, standing at his favorite window overlooking the city. "Now it just means I can see everything I lost." "Then why stay?" Naomi asked. "Because leaving would mean accepting she's gone. As long as I'm here in the house we designed together, she's still present somehow. Does that sound insane?" "No," Naomi said quietly. "It sounds like love." The breakthrough came 6 weeks after the storm. Naomi arrived at work to find the West Wing door open. She stood in the hallway staring at that impossible sight. The door that had been locked for 4 years, the room that had been sealed like a tomb, was open. Just slightly, maybe 6 inches, but open. "You can go in," Julian's voice came from behind her, "if you want." Naomi turned to find him standing there, looking exhausted and somehow lighter at the same time. "Are you sure?" "No," he admitted, "but I'm tired of living in a museum. Elena would hate what I've done to this place, to myself." The studio was breathtaking. Canvas after canvas lined the walls, Elena's art, bright and bold and alive. Abstracts that seemed to capture emotion in color, portraits that revealed soul with single brushstrokes, landscapes that made you believe in beauty. The room itself was mostly glass, designed to let in maximum light, and even covered in 4 years of dust, it glowed. She was incredible, Naomi whispered. She was, Julian agreed. And I've been keeping her work locked away like it would hurt less if I didn't see it. But it doesn't hurt less. It just hurts differently. They spent the afternoon cleaning the studio together, wiping dust from frames, opening windows to let fresh air chase away the staleness of grief. Julian told stories about each painting, his voice growing stronger with every memory shared. And then, as sunlight slanted through the western windows, Julian said something that changed everything. "The experimental treatment your mother needs, how much?" Naomi froze. "Mr. Ashcroft." "How much, Naomi?" $200,000, she whispered. "But I'm not asking." "I know you're not," Julian interrupted. "But I'm offering, let me pay for it, please." The world tilted. "Why?" "Because," Julian said simply, "you gave me back my wife's art studio. You made me play piano again. You reminded me that living in a glass house is supposed to be about transparency, not isolation. Let me give your mother more time. It's the least I can do." Naomi felt tears streaming down her face. "I can't accept that, it's too much." "It's not nearly enough," Julian replied, "but it's what I can offer." That night Julian transferred the money. Naomi called the treatment center, sobbing with relief and gratitude and disbelief. Her mother would get the experimental treatment. She would get more time. And in the glass house on the hill, for the first time in 4 years, there was music. Julian played the piano while Naomi listened, and the notes filled the transparent walls with something that felt almost like hope. But hope, like glass, can be fragile. A week later, a man approached Naomi outside the house. He was young, sharp-dressed, with the predatory smile of someone who sensed opportunity. "Naomi Hale," he said. "I'm from the LA Tribune. I'd like to talk to you about Julian Ashcroft." "I have nothing to say," Naomi replied, trying to move past him. "I'm prepared to pay for information," the reporter continued, stepping into her path. "Exclusive details about his life. Photos, if you have them. We'd pay very well. $50,000 for the right story." Naomi's breath caught. $50,000. That would cover her mother's medication, the hospice care, everything beyond the experimental treatment. "I'm not interested," she said firmly. "Please leave me alone." The reporter handed her a card. "In case you change your mind, the offer stands. We're very interested in Mr. Ashcroft's recovery." He left. Naomi threw the card away. But late that night, when she called the hospice nurse and learned her mother had taken a turn for the worse, when the nurse gently mentioned that medication to manage, the pain would cost another $3,000 a month, when Naomi did the math and realized she was already drowning again. She dug the card out of the trash. The decision happened in stages, each one a small betrayal that felt justified in the moment. First, Naomi told herself she would just meet with the reporter, just listen. Information wasn't commitment. Then she told herself that one photo wouldn't hurt anyone. Julian's recovery was beautiful. He deserved to be seen emerging from grief, didn't he? People would celebrate his healing. Finally, she told herself that her mother's life was worth more than Julian's privacy. That survival trumped loyalty. That she would explain everything to Julian after, and he would understand. But deep down, in a place she didn't want to examine, Naomi knew she was betraying the only person who truly understood her pain. The photo opportunity came naturally. Julian had started playing piano every evening, losing himself in music the way drowning people grasp at air. Naomi had watched from the doorway, moved by the sight of this broken man finding pieces of himself again. One evening, as golden light poured through the glass walls and Julian played Clair de Lune with his eyes closed, face peaceful for the first time since she'd met him, Naomi pulled out her phone. She told herself it was to remember the moment, to capture this turning point in his healing. She was lying. She took 3 photos. In the best one, Julian was silhouetted against the sunset, hands on the piano keys, head tilted back slightly as if the music was lifting him. It was beautiful, intimate, private. It was worth $50,000. Naomi met the reporter in a coffee shop across the city. She'd chosen a location far from the glass house, as if distance could dilute the betrayal. The reporter, his name was David Chen, smiled when he saw her, the expression of a shark scenting blood. "Ms. Hale, I'm so glad you reconsidered." "I have conditions," Naomi said, voice shaking. "You don't mention how you got the photo. You don't contact me again. And you portray this positively. Julian is healing. That's the story, not scandal." "Of course," David agreed easily, too easily. "We're interested in hope, not gossip. May I see the photo?" Naomi showed him, watched his eyes light up with professional greed. "Perfect," he breathed. "This is exactly what we need. I can have the money transferred today." "Make it anonymous," Naomi said. "A hospital fund donation in my mother's name. I don't want it traceable to me." "Smart," David said, and Naomi hated how much he sounded like he approved. The transaction took 15 minutes. Naomi watched $50,000 appear in the hospital fund account, watched David Chen leave with the photo that would destroy everything, and felt her soul crack like glass under pressure. She'd done it. She'd chosen her mother's life over Julian's trust. And there was no taking it back. The article published 3 days later. Naomi saw it first on her phone at 6 a.m., the headline screaming across her screen. "Reclusive billionaire's secret moment. Ashcroft plays piano again after wife's death." Below it, her photograph. Julian, beautiful and vulnerable, captured in his most private moment. The article itself was sympathetic, talking about Julian's journey through grief, celebrating his apparent recovery, speculating about his return to public life. David Chen had kept his word about the positive spin. But the comment section was vicious. "Guess money can't buy privacy. Who took this? Fire them immediately. This is disgusting. Let the man grieve in peace." The photo went viral within hours. By noon, it had been shared across every major news outlet. By evening, there were paparazzi outside the glass house gates. And Naomi knew, with sick certainty, that Julian would know exactly who'd betrayed him. She found him in the living room, standing at the window, staring at the photographers gathered below like vultures. He held his phone in one hand, the screen showing the article. When he heard her approach, he didn't turn. "They're calling it the return of Julian Ashcroft," he said, voice empty. "Apparently I'm emerging from my grief and finding healing through music. Isn't that touching? Julian,
I
How
trusted you
much did
with
they pay
this,
you?"
and now
He
look
turned
what's
now, and the look on
happened.
his face was worse than anger. It was devastation. "For the photo, for this violation. How much was my trust worth?" Naomi's throat closed. $50,000. Julian laughed, a sound like breaking glass. 50,000. I gave you 200,000 to save your mother and you sold me out for 50. He stepped closer. "Do you know what the worst part is? It's not even the money. It's that you stood in that doorway, watched me play, and saw a transaction. You looked at the first moment of real peace I'd felt in 4 years and thought, how can I profit from this?" "It wasn't like that," Naomi whispered, tears streaming down her face. "My mother needed—" "Your mother," Julian's voice cracked. "You think I don't understand desperate choices. You think I haven't made them. But Naomi, I trusted you. In this house of glass where I can see everything and hide nothing, I let you in. I showed you Alina's studio. I played music for the first time since she died. And you—" He stopped, composing himself with visible effort. "You photographed my grief and sold it to the highest bidder." "I'm sorry," Naomi sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do." "You could have asked me," Julian said quietly. "You could have told me you needed more help. I would have given it, but instead you decided I was material, a story, a commodity." He walked to the door, paused. "Pack your things, you have 1 hour." The words were the same ones he'd said in her nightmares, but hearing them in reality was infinitely worse. "Please," Naomi begged. "Please, Julian, I made a mistake. I'll make it right. "There is no making this right," Julian said without turning. "You can't unbreak trust. You can't unsell someone's privacy. And you can't unteach me that letting people close is always, always a mistake." He left her there, alone in the glass house that suddenly felt more like a prison than ever. Naomi packed through tears, her hands shaking so badly she could barely fold her clothes. Every item she placed in her suitcase felt like another nail in a coffin of her own making. She'd saved her mother and destroyed herself. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his kind face now carefully neutral again. "I'll drive you to your apartment," he said gently. "Mr. Ashcroft has asked me to ensure you leave safely." "Is he?" Naomi couldn't finish the question. "He's in the West Wing," Marcus replied. "The door is locked again." Of course it was. Naomi had broken more than trust. She'd shattered the fragile healing that had been taking root. Julian had opened himself for the first time in 4 years, and she'd proven that vulnerability was dangerous. She'd confirmed every fear that grief had taught him. As Marcus drove her away from the glass house, Naomi looked back once. Through the transparent walls she could see Julian standing at the piano, but he wasn't playing. He was just standing there, one hand on the closed lid, as still as a statue in a museum. The last image she had of him was a man who'd learned to hope, and had that hope destroyed. And it was entirely her fault. 3 months passed like a funeral march, slow, inevitable, and filled with endings. The scandal faded, as scandals always do. The internet moved on to newer outrages, fresher content, more immediate drama. David Chen won an award for compassionate celebrity journalism. The photograph of Julian at the piano became an iconic image, praised for capturing the human face of grief. No one mentioned the betrayal that had made it possible. Naomi spent those months at her mother's bedside. The experimental treatment was working, not curing, but buying time. Precious weeks and days that Naomi hoarded like a miser, knowing each one was purchased with Julian's broken trust. Her mother, lucid during rare clear moments, asked about the glass house. Naomi couldn't lie to her. "I did something terrible, Mom," she whispered one night, holding her mother's thin hand. "I hurt someone who helped us. I betrayed his trust for money." Her mother's eyes, clouded with medication but still sharp with love, focused on her. "Did you have a choice?" "Yes," Naomi said. "That's what makes it unforgivable. I had a choice, and I chose survival over integrity." "Then you chose like a human," her mother replied. "We're all just trying to survive, baby. Sometimes survival costs more than we want to pay." "But what if the cost is too high?" Naomi asked. "What if I saved you but destroyed something good?" Her mother squeezed her hand weakly. "Then you live with it. You carry the guilt. You accept that being human means making impossible choices and living with the consequences." It wasn't comfort, but it was truth. Naomi tried reaching out to Julian once. A letter, handwritten because email felt too impersonal for the weight of what she needed to say. "Dear Julian, I know this letter won't fix anything. I know I destroyed something that can't be repaired, but I need you to know that the choice I made haunts me every day. You were right, I could have asked you for help. I should have trusted that the man who gave me $200,000 for my mother's treatment would have understood if I needed more. But I was scared. Scared you'd say no. Scared I'd already asked too much. Scared that I was becoming dependent on your generosity. So I made a choice that protected my mother and destroyed you, and I will carry that shame for the rest of my life. You opened your home to me. You showed me your wife's art. You played music again after years of silence, and I repaid your vulnerability with betrayal. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that you were right about everything. Trust is fragile, hope is dangerous, and people will always disappoint you. I'm sorry I proved your worst beliefs true. Naomi." She mailed it to the glass house. It was never returned, so she assumed Julian received it, but he never responded. The silence from the mansion on the hill was absolute. 5 months after her expulsion from the glass house, Naomi's mother died. It happened on a Sunday morning, peacefully, with Naomi holding her hand. The experimental treatment had given them 6 extra months together, months filled with stories and memories and love. Months that wouldn't have existed without Julian's initial generosity and Naomi's subsequent betrayal. At the funeral, a small affair with a handful of her mother's friends, Naomi kept thinking about Julian's words. "You can't unbreak trust. You can't unteach me that letting people close is always a mistake." She'd saved her mother and condemned Julian to a lifetime of isolation. She'd chosen one life and destroyed another kind of life entirely. The math didn't work out in her favor. 2 weeks after the funeral, Naomi found herself driving past the glass house. She hadn't planned it. Her errands didn't take her anywhere near the mansion. But grief does strange things to navigation, and somehow her car ended up on that familiar winding road, climbing the hill toward the transparent monument to love and loss. She parked at the gate, staring up at the structure that had briefly felt like home. The glass house looked different, darker. The curtains that Julian had started opening, letting light and life back in, were closed again. The west wing was certainly locked, and even from a distance Naomi could see that the piano was covered again, the black cloth draped over it like a funeral shroud. The house had returned to its mausoleum state. Julian had retreated back into grief, locked himself away again, proven that healing was too dangerous to attempt. And it was her fault. A car pulled up behind her, Marcus in Julian's black sedan. He rolled down the window, his kind face now etched with sadness. "Miss Hale," he said gently, "I heard about your mother. I'm very sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Naomi whispered. How is he?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. He plays piano sometimes, late at night when he thinks no one can hear, but he stops after a few notes. He never finishes a song anymore. Naomi closed her eyes against the pain. "I destroyed him, didn't I?" "You made a choice," Marcus replied. "Whether that choice destroyed him or whether he's choosing to stay destroyed, that's on him now. But Ms. Hale, you should know, he read your letter. Multiple times. I found it on his desk, worn at the edges like he'd been holding it often." "Did it change anything?" "No," Marcus admitted. "But it mattered, I think. I think he understands why you did what you did. Understanding and forgiving aren't the same thing, but understanding is something." It was cold comfort, but Naomi clutched at it anyway. "Tell him," she started, then stopped. What could she say? What words existed that could bridge the chasm between them? "Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I hope he finds his way back to music. Tell him Alina wouldn't want him to live in silence." "He knows all that," Marcus said quietly. "But knowing and doing are different things too." Marcus drove away, leaving Naomi alone with the glass house looming above her, beautiful and cold and forever out of reach. She never went back. 2 years later, Naomi rebuilt her life in pieces. She found work at a community center, teaching art to underprivileged kids, ironic, given that she destroyed an artist's legacy. She volunteered at hospice centers, giving to other families the kind of support she'd received. She carried her guilt like a stone, letting it shape her choices without crushing her entirely. Sometimes, late at night, she thought about the glass house, about Julian standing at the piano, hands hovering over keys he was too afraid to press, about the man who taught her that grief recognized itself in others, and that recognition could lead to either healing or destruction. She'd chosen destruction, or survival, or both. The mathematics of impossible choices never balanced. Occasionally, she saw mentions of Julian in architectural magazines. Reclusive architect Julian Ashcroft has withdrawn from public life, entirely following his brief emergence 2 years ago. Sources say the glass mansion remained sealed, Ashcroft declining all interview requests. He disappeared again, become invisible in his transparent house. And Naomi knew, with the certainty of shared grief, that he'd never open those doors again. She taught him the oldest lesson of trauma. Hope is dangerous, trust is fatal, and the safest thing to do with your heart is lock it away where no one can reach it. The final confirmation came through Marcus, who called her one winter evening, his voice heavy with something Naomi couldn't name. "I thought you should know," he said. "Mr. Ashcroft has decided to seal the west wing permanently. He's having it walled off from the rest of the house. No glass, just concrete, a room that can't be seen into or out of." Naomi felt something break inside her chest. "Why?" "He said transparency was a mistake," Marcus replied. "He said Alina was wrong, that you can't build a life on openness because openness invites violation. He's having most of the glass walls replaced with conventional ones. He said he's tired of living in a house where everything can be seen." "He's destroying their dream," Naomi whispered. "He's destroying what remains of his hope," Marcus corrected gently. "And Ms. Hale, I don't think he's wrong to blame you for that, but I also don't think he's right to do this to himself. Sometimes we hurt people, and sometimes we choose to stay hurt. Both can be true. After Marcus hung up, Naomi sat in the darkness of her small apartment and cried for the glass house that would become concrete, for the piano that would stay silent, for the man who'd almost learned to live again before she taught him that living was too dangerous. She cried for her mother, who'd gotten 6 extra months of life at the cost of someone else's lifetime of healing. She cried for herself, for the impossible choice she'd made and the guilt she'd carry forever. And she cried for Julian, alone in his house of disappearing glass, proving that some things once broken can never be transparent again. On the anniversary of her mother's death, Naomi visited the glass house one final time, or what had been the glass house. Construction crews had completed their work. Half the transparent walls were now solid stone and concrete. The west wing was invisible, sealed behind walls that revealed nothing. The house was no longer a monument to transparency. It was a fortress, a tomb, a perfect reflection of grief that had calcified into permanent isolation. Through the remaining glass panels, Naomi could see the piano, still covered, still silent, still waiting for music that would never come. She left a single note at the gate, knowing Julian would never read it but needing to say it anyway. "I'm sorry, not for choosing my mother, I'd make that choice again, but for not being brave enough to ask for help, for teaching you that trust was a mistake when it's actually the only thing that makes living bearable. You were almost free, Julian. You were almost home. I hope you find your way back to music someday. Alina would want you to, and despite everything, so do I." She drove away and didn't look back, because some endings don't have redemption or resolution. Some stories don't end, they simply stop, like music fading into silence, like light dimming to darkness, like glass turning to stone. Julian Ashcroft would live out his days in his fortress of grief, having learned the wrong lesson from Naomi's betrayal. And Naomi would carry the knowledge that she'd saved one life at the cost of another's joy. Neither would heal completely, neither would forgive entirely, and the glass house that had been built as a testament to love and transparency would stand as a monument to how easily hope can shatter. Some fractures can't be repaired, some silences can't be broken, and sometimes the price of survival is living with consequences that echo long after the choice is made. The glass house became concrete, the piano stayed silent, and two people haunted by the same impossible choice lived separate lives, forever connected by the moment that both saved and destroyed them. What would you have done in Naomi's place? When survival is on the line and someone you love is dying, where is the line between necessity and betrayal? This story forces us to confront an impossible truth. Sometimes there are no good choices, only choices we can live with and choices we can't. Naomi saved her mother but destroyed a man's chance at healing. Julian protected his heart but condemned himself to lifetime isolation. And we're left asking, who was right? Or is that even the right question? This story reminds us that grief doesn't just break hearts, it teaches us to fear hope. It shows us that trust, once broken, leaves scars that never fully heal. And it reveals a harsh reality. Love doesn't always fail loudly with drama and confrontation. Sometimes it dies quietly, in glass houses turning to concrete, in music that stops mid-song, in doors that lock and never open again. If this story made you feel something, anger at Naomi's choice, sadness for Julian's isolation, understanding for impossible decisions, or fury at circumstances that force people into no-win situations, then hit that like button. Your engagement tells me these complex, messy, heartbreaking stories matter to you. Drop a comment below. Would you have made Naomi's choice? Could you forgive her betrayal? Do you think Julian will ever heal? I read every single comment and I want to know where you stand on this impossible moral dilemma. And if you want more stories that don't shy away from complexity, stories about choices that haunt us, grief that transforms us, and love that breaks as beautifully as glass, then subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because the world isn't black and white, and the stories I tell reflect that truth. This is a community for people who understand that sometimes survival costs more than we want to pay. Sometimes choosing to live means choosing guilt. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is sit with that complexity and admit we don't have easy answers. You're not alone in grappling with these impossible questions. None of us are. And every like, every comment, every share reminds us that we're all just trying to navigate a world where love and betrayal can exist in the same heartbeat. So smash that like button if this story hit you in the chest. Comment glass prison if you believe healing is worth the risk, or concrete walls if you think Julian made the right choice to protect himself. Subscribe for more stories that respect your intelligence and your capacity to sit with difficult truths. Because grief doesn't end, guilt doesn't disappear, but understanding that we're all making impossible choices in houses of glass, that's what makes us human. Thank you for being here. Thank you for engaging with stories that matter. And thank you for reminding me that complexity isn't something to fear. It's something to explore together, one impossible choice at a time. Now let's talk about it. Comment section is yours. What would you have done?